Video 7.1 Weekly Context.
Hello everyone and welcome to week 7. Our focus for this week is the second composition phase of the design cycle. Our visual inspiration for this week comes from Woodley Wonderworks, and I chose it because of its representation of our primary focus for the class, which is to look at copyright and licensing as it relates to the composition of your work. Up to this point, we have looked at the planning and preparation phase of the design cycle. We've also looked at the process for curating resources to be used in your design work, and the role that design elements and principles play in the creation and composition of design artifacts. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects of the composition stage, including focusing on the importance of understanding copyright and licensing. More specifically, this video will explore what is the role of licensing in the creation of composition and of creative artifacts. Sorry about that. How do you know if a creative asset that you did not create is safe to use in your design composition? What is the difference between open source material and licensed material? And we'll explore very briefly, should designers protect their creative work or provide them as open source materials? So, the first question, what is the role of licensing in the creation and composition of creative assets? Copyright and licensing play an important role in design because they help to protect the integrity of the individual's work from a variety of things that could be unauthorized, such as copying and pasting and editing and unauthorized distribution. Digital technology allows for the easy copying and pasting of pretty much anything that can be found in a digital format. Copyright protects content creators from the unauthorized use of their work. As a content creator yourself, you should give some consideration to what licensing you want to use to protect the work that you have created. There are many resources about this available to you through the course folder and online. However, what I want to point out is that the role of copyright is essentially to protect the creator of the work. Another question for you to consider when looking at copyright and licensing is to determine how you know whether or not a creative asset can be used in your design work. Is it safe? This is the big question. It's an important question because if you use an asset that you did not create without the permission of the creator, you may be found to be in violation of copyright and at best be asked to remove the creative asset from your work and at worst, thrown in jail. I'm just kidding, but not really. This is not to scare you, but just to get you to understand that you cannot just use any image, icon, or video that you find on the internet in your design work. Now, when most people want to find an image or an icon or a video to put in a presentation or a poster, what they do is they go to Google and they search the image directory. Once they found an image that they like, they download it to their computer and proceed to use it in their instructional materials. The problem is that the majority of images in the Google image search are protected by copyright and require permission from the creator for the purpose of redistribution. A general rule of thumb here is that when in doubt, use caution and avoid using any image that you don't know is open source. One way to determine if something is open source or not is to look for the Open Source Initiative logo. If you see this image, this means that the work you are looking at is free to download, use, and manipulate. There may be some conditions, so be sure to read the fine print. Another way to look for work or assets that are open source is to look for the Creative Commons logo. This logo indicates that the artifact is free to use and share. However, it is prohibited from being sold or redistributed for compensation. You can also look for the attributed license icon, which indicates that an asset may be shared or used for publication as long as credit is given to the creator of the work. Each of these logos are just indicators, things that you might be able to look for when evaluating whether or not an asset can be used. It's always advisable to look at the fine print in more detail, but these things help to provide initial indication of work that is safe to use. Now, You may also choose to purchase royalty-free or stock images, which also have various levels of copyright protection but are generally available to purchase and allow a single, non-profitable use of the image, which means that you can't buy it and then turn around and sell it. There are many online libraries that house images that can be purchased, such as iStock Photo, Shutterstock, and Fotolia. Again, use caution when you are using these types of resources, because you may not know whether or not the source that you're taking or even buying allows for you to use it. If you ever have any questions or concerns, it's always best to contact the creator directly to clarify. Generally speaking, there are two types of materials available for designers to use. These are referred to as open source materials and licensed materials. We're going to talk very briefly about these, but again, you are encouraged to explore what these two concepts mean as it relates to your work, because the understanding of these two concepts will be dependent on the type of media that you are using. When we're looking at the difference between open source material and licensed material, the first thing we can look at is what is open source material. Open source material is actually referred to as copyleft, which means that it involves free and open source licensing of creative work. This means that the creator of the work has opened up the copyright so that any user can modify it, build it, change it, copy it, and they do not require attribution or compensation for their work. A current example of something that is open source is the Android operating system from Google. What the Android operating system does is allow other manufacturers such as HTC or Samsung to use the Android operating system within their products. They do not have to give any attribution to Google that it is Android and are not required to provide any compensation for the base code. The second category of copyright involves works that are protected in some way. Usually when you see this, Creative Commons, that means that there's some level of licensing. Now, there are various levels of protection that exist within this category, and you should definitely explore it further. What is important to note here is that if any category of creative work is created under this copyright license, it is protected in some way from the use, modification, or distribution of the original work. This is not to suggest that the materials cannot be used, but there are specific conditions under which they can, such as they need to provide consent or attribute the work to the creator, or in some cases compensation may be required. A resource for finding open source materials related to graphic and visual design is searchcreativecommons.org. This is a website specifically devoted for searching for images that are either open source or have limited copyright protection and can be used for the purpose of your design artifacts. Trust me when I say this is a great resource for you to find images that you can use. The site uses a variety of online databases such as Google's image database, Flickr, and Wikimedia, but the key point here is that it only searches for images that are either open source or licensed to be used in other contexts. Now, using this site could be the first step in finding assets rather than just using Google. The identification of different types of protection ultimately leads to a discussion about whether or not designers should protect their work or allow them to be open source. This is an intricate discussion that has been made more complex by the affordances of digital technology, and ultimately it is at the discretion of the designer to either protect or not to protect their work. From the perspective of a designer, open source materials provide wider distribution and exposure to the artist's work. They also require less management because there's no need to track the usage of any piece of art. Many designers also feel that making their work open source serves as a way to give back to the design community and move the visual design industry forward. Licensed work provides the creator with more control over the where and the how of their assets being used. This can also serve as an avenue for exposure when assets require attribution, which can promote the designer's work overall. Finally, works that are protected under licensing can serve as a revenue stream for designers, which allows them to continue to develop professionally. It is important to note that the discussion about the composition of creative work can often be intimidating, and what you should keep in mind is that you are involved in a process that ultimately impacts other people. In this case, caution is generally considered the best practice. As you move forward in your design work, the issue of copyright and licensing should play a part in your decision-making process. To help guide you in this process, the following questions should be taken into consideration. The first question is, when you are creating assets or composing assets, can you identify the licensing for each asset that you are using that you did not create? Of course, if you have created the asset yourself, you don't necessarily need to ask yourself for permission. However, if you have not, can you identify whether or not the asset is able to be used? The second thing you should think about is what resources are available for finding open source materials that can be used. And, subsequent to this, is what are the advantages and disadvantages of using open source materials? Yes, getting something for free is really nice. However, there may be other disadvantages to the open source materials that you may not have thought about. The next question to consider is what resources are available for finding stock media that can be purchased. As we discussed earlier, there are stock media websites such as iStockphoto.com or Fotolia that can provide you with an opportunity to purchase pre-made assets from creators that are selling them. However, when you're looking at these resources, you also need to give consideration to the benefits and the disadvantages of using stock media. Lastly, I would encourage you to consider, as a content creator, what should you be thinking about in relation to protecting your own work? Do you want people to be able to freely use the work that you have created, or would you like to protect your work under some type of copyright or licensing? These are all aspects of your design work that you need to explore further, and you have time to do so over the next week or so.